the 8400F is a good CPU. There are a lot of tech YouTubers out there who are trashing the CPU and are saying to avoid it at all costs. However, I strongly disagree with that sentiment. There is a place for this on the market, and that place is the cheapest AM5 CPU that you can get that will get you on the AM5 platform. And these days, you can build an AM5 platform new for similar cost to an AM4 system. So it kind of makes it a no-brainer. What up, fam? Welcome back to 88-Bit Tech. I'm AJ, and today we're going to take a look at the 8400F in 1440p and 4K gaming. Spoiler alert, it's actually really good. There's a lot of pros and cons to this CPU, and one of the main cons with this CPU is definitely the 16 megabytes of L3 cache, which is very low. The 8400F is about, performance-wise, is comparable to a Ryzen 5 5600, which is also an excellent CPU that can handle 1440p and 4K gaming with some of the newest technology out there with little to no bottleneck. So you don't really have to worry much about that at all. However, it does come with 32 megabytes of L3 cache, which is super important for games. But I'm going to show you that even with 16 megabytes of L3 cache, the 8400F will hold its own. The other con on the 8400F is that it is only able to run a maximum of PCI 4.0 X8 for your GPUs. However, there's a big caveat here. Multiple tests have been done, and I'm going to link those videos here as well, that show that the difference between PCIe 4.0 X8 versus X16 lanes is minimal at best. We're talking 1% or less. So like 1 to 2 FPS difference between PCI 4.0 X8 versus PCI 4.0 X16. So real world, it's going to be a very minimal difference that you're not going to really notice. You're still going to be getting majority of the maximum capabilities of your GPU, especially at 1440p and 4K. The other con regarding this is that they use thermal paste between the IHS and the CPU. So it does run pretty hot. So you're going to need an adequate cooling solution. However, it doesn't need to be that bad because I will show you in my build, the build that I have this in, it works completely fine. I undervolt the CPU with a -20 in curve optimizer while at the same time overclocking it to 4.95 gigahertz, making it much faster in single core performance than the Ryzen 5 5600. In my opinion, the 8400F has way more pros than cons, and the biggest pro being its price. The 8400F you can regularly get new on AliExpress for under $100 US. And if you wait for a sale, you can get it as low as $85 US. No other CPU comes close to that price. Even the 7400F ends up being significantly more. We're talking like 20 to 40% more expensive than the 8400F. Very cost effective. And on top of that, these days, AM5 prices on a lot of parts has dropped down significantly. You can build a brand new AM5 system for the same price as a brand new AM4 system. But the AM5 system has upgrade options. So I'm pairing this entry-level AM5 CPU with the entry-level RTX card from Nvidia, the 2060 non-super 6 gigabyte. The specific card I'm using is the Asus Turbo blower style OC edition. I've undervolted the card to save power while maintaining the same level of performance. Using DLSS 4, I can get a more than playable experience with minimal latency with the 8400F and the RTX 2060 while maintaining amazing visual fidelity. You don't have to take my word for it. I will get into the benchmarks and you can see it for yourself. And we are testing it in some of the most played games on Steam. Here's the full PC specs. The 8400F is overclocked to 4.95 gigahertz with a -20 value in PBO curve optimizer. Asus Turbo is undervolted to 0.975 millivolts with the same stock OC clock speeds. And the DDR5 memory is overclocked to CL38 6000 megatransfers per second. Please note I recorded all FPS metrics without Nvidia recording software running. So this is true FPS that you will get without the software. The software seems to take anywhere from 3 to 10% off the FPS, so I had to do it this way. It took me a longer time, but at least you're going to get much more accurate numbers. First up, we have the #1 most played game on Steam, Counter-Strike 2. running the Pro settings as pulled from prosettings.net in 1440p and 4K native. For 1440p, we averaged 194 FPS with a 1% low of 98 and a 0.1% low of 73. For 4K, we averaged 122 FPS and a 1% low of 82 with a 0.1% low of 62. This is high refresh rate territory, and with the Pro settings, this is a competitive esports title, so this is something that most people will be playing at. You're going to have a good time with this combination at these resolutions. Next up, we have Monster Hunter World. To this day, this is a poorly optimized title, and I do not recommend picking this up until they sort that out. However, at the time of recording, this was the number 5 most played game on Steam, so we're gonna throw it into this benchmark suite. With 1440p at DLSS 4 Ultra Performance and the lowest settings, we averaged 43 FPS with a 1% low of 32 and a 0.1% low of 19. At 4K with DLSS 4 Ultra Performance as well and the lowest settings, we averaged 34 FPS with a 1% low of 26 and a 0.1% low of 16. Not a great result, and if you're going to be playing Monster Hunter Wilds, I would recommend probably sticking to 1080p in this particular title, and the 2060 should be fine. The next top 10 game we have is Marvel Rivals, and in 1440p with DLSS 4 balanced in the lowest preset, we averaged 94 FPS with a 1% low of 72 and a 0.1% low of 65. In 4K DLSS 4 performance mode, we set it to the lowest settings as well, and we averaged 52 FPS with a 1% low of 46 and a 0.1% low of 44. Another thing to note is that we are getting pretty much max GPU utilization in these games that we are testing today. So we're experiencing little to no bottleneck in most of these titles. Obviously with some of the esports ones, we do get much more CPU utilization, so the GPU isn't even taxed that heavily. However, generally speaking, at these resolutions, we are maxing out the performance of our GPU. Continuing with another most played game on Steam, we have Grand Theft Auto 5 Enhanced. At 1440p with DLSS 4 quality, high settings, we averaged 86 FPS with a 1% low of 72 and a 0.1% low of 69. At 4K DLSS 4 performance, minimum settings, we averaged 63 FPS with a 1% low of 56 and a 0.1% low of 52. Frame time graph is really smooth, and we are getting little to no CPU bottleneck here as well. Currently sitting at the number 20 most played games on Steam, we have Call of Duty Warzone. Unfortunately, this title does not support DLSS 4, so we had to use DLSS 3. However, with DLSS 3, I still think we get a pretty good visually playable game with decently high FPS. With 1440p DLSS 3 set to performance and with the minimum preset, we have an average of 109 FPS, a 1% low of 85 and a 0.1% low of 73. In 4K DLSS 3 Ultra Performance, minimum preset, we get an average of 85 FPS with a 1% low of 66 and a 0.1% low of 46. Frame time graph is really smooth, minimal CPU bottleneck. For the next top most played game on Steam, we have Red Dead Redemption 2. In 1440p DLSS 4 quality, default balanced settings, we average 66 FPS with a 1% low of 56 and a 0.1% low of 53. For 4K DLSS 4 Ultra Performance, on the lowest balance setting, we got average of 55 FPS a 1% low of 48, and a 0.1% low of 45. We do get a very slight CPU bottleneck in this situation, but it's not anything that you're really going to notice when playing at these resolutions. Next up, we have Baldur's Gate 3, and we are running it in two different graphical presets. In 1440p, running it in Ultra, and in 4K, we're running it in Low. Both of these presets have different types of depth of field applied to it in the settings. Since I am using these presets as stock, I'm not adjusting anything. So you'll notice that the image on the left has a bit of blurriness to it, but that's because of the depth of field. There's actually more detail on the performance side in the 4K footage. However, one thing you'll notice is once it pans out and this battle starts, on the bottom, if you look at the image of that circular kind of stone pattern with the design, it's way less detailed than in the 1440p results. Speaking of which, in 1440p, we are running DLSS 4 balanced with the ultra settings, and we average 74 FPS with a 1% low of 64 and a 0.1% low of 20. In 4K, we're running DLSS performance, averaging 58 FPS with a 1% low of 56 and a 0.1% low of 22.
For peace.
Onward.
Have to keep going.
This is probably the one you guys have all been waiting for. We've got Cyberpunk 2077, and it also is the most impressive result out of all of this. DLSS 4 looks incredible on Cyberpunk 2077, and it's crazy how well the 2060 keeps up in this scenario. So at 1440p DLSS 4 balanced, on the high preset, we average 60 FPS with a 1% low of 46 and a 0.1% low of 38. With 4K, with DLSS 4 Ultra performance, in the medium preset, we average 68 FPS with a 1% low of 51 and a 0.1% low of 44. I was astounded at how well this game held up at these resolutions. It looks amazing in my opinion. Even in ultra performance, DLSS 4 is an absolute game changer. Not to mention, we are getting pretty much max GPU utilization, so the 8400F is able to keep up with these resolutions as well. So you don't have to worry about a CPU bottleneck much, if at all, with this particular setup. Making it into the top 50 most played games on Steam, we have Helldivers 2. Unfortunately, this game does not support DLSS or FSR or XES upscalers. They use their own native upscaler. That said, their native upscaler has come a long way since the release of Helldivers 2. It used to be terrible, now it's actually quite good. So at 1440p in-game quality upscaling at mediums preset, we are averaging 63 FPS with a 1% low of 56 and a 0.1% low of 50. At 4K balanced, we're running low preset with medium textures, averaging 70 FPS with a 1% low of 59 and a 0.1% low of 47. At these settings, especially at these resolutions, I think the game still looks amazing and performs quite well. One thing to note here, we are getting pretty much maximum GPU utilization, so the 8400F has no problems maintaining a really good result for Helldivers 2. One little caveat, the 2060 only has 6GB of VRAM, so you're only able to use medium textures with this game. I'm sure if I bumped it up to high textures, you'd get a lot more spikes in the frame time graph, leading to quite lower numbers in the 1% and the 0.1% lows. As it stands now, these are pretty good values for the lows. Next up, we have Witcher 3. For both of these games, we ran low SSR because screen space reflections really hits the FPS, and it dropped it below 60 in these two resolutions. So at 1440p, we had DLSS 4 set to quality. On the high preset, we averaged 71 FPS with a 1% low of 44 and a 0.1% low of 41. In 4K, we ran DLSS 4 performance. On the medium preset, we averaged 71 FPS as well, and a 1% low of 56 and a 0.1% low of 40. The game looked really good at these resolutions with these settings, and we're getting pretty much max GPU utilization again, so the 8400F has no problems keeping up here.
Starving in this area.
Go with this thing.
I might as well war. Never know when they're done for.
What you got there?
Next up, we have Forza Horizon 5, and in this game, we didn't actually have to use any upscaling at all. So we're running at native in 1440p and 4K with the Ryzen 5 8400F and the RTX 2060 in this game. At 1440p native, high with MSAA set to 2x, we averaged 85 FPS with a 1% low of 73 and a 0.1% low of 64. At 4K in native, we ran it on high with MSAA set to 2x. We averaged 61 FPS and a 1% low of 53 and a 0.1% low of 50. Next up, we have Ghost of Tsushima. There's Cut. This is not a difficult title to run, and it's actually pretty well optimized. But at 1440p, we did run DLSS 4 quality plus frame generation on high preset. We averaged 82 FPS with a 1% low of 45 and a 0.1% low of 22. At 4K DLSS performance plus frame generation, on the medium preset, we averaged 64 FPS with a 1% low of 51 and a 0.1% low of 44. I forgot to move MSI Afterburner overlay over, but for this one we are getting pretty much max GPU utilization as well. Moving on to the final two games on this benchmark suite. These are actually two of the toughest games to run graphically wise, and this is Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 at 1440p DLSS 4 performance. On the medium preset, we averaged 60 FPS with a 1% low of 49 and a 0.1% low of 41. In 4K DLSS 4 Ultra performance, on the low preset, we averaged 55 FPS with a 1% low of 44 and a 0.1% low of 43. With these particular settings, the game looked pretty good, and once again I forgot to move over the overlay here. However, I can tell you that we are getting max GPU utilization, so the 8400F is handling this just fine. Rounding off this benchmark suite, we have Starfield. This is still one of the most difficult games to run in my benchmark suite, and at 1440p I decided to opt for FSR 3 quality so I can use frame generation on the medium preset so I can hit that average 60 FPS.
Reason for it, with DLSS ultra performance on this game at 1440p, I was unable to hit 60 FPS. But with FSR3, and I averaged 66 FPS with a 1% low of 56 and a 0.1% low of 53. At 4K, however, I decided to opt for something a bit different. Instead of reverting to FSR, I decided to stick with DLSS 4 at 4K, because even at ultra performance, the game still looked really good, but on the low preset, you still get an average of 40 FPS. I found that this was much smoother and snappier at 40 FPS than it was at 60 using FSR3 plus frame generation at this resolution. So that's the reason why I decided to keep it at that 40, or keep it at 4K DLSS 4 ultra performance.
As you can see, the Ryzen 5 8400F was completely capable of handling 1440p and 4K gaming with the RTX 2060. For its price, it's hard to not recommend it, especially if you're on a budget. If you're building new, then you really should only be considering building AM5. And you can use this CPU for quite a while. As you can see, it can more than handle all of these games in 1440p and 4K while looking fairly good. You're not going to be playing at max settings, but you're still going to be playing at very respectable settings with more than adequate FPS. So don't be discouraged if you picked up the 8400F. You didn't make a bad decision. You're on AM5. You'll be set for a while. If you want to upgrade down the line, you absolutely can. The Toasty Bros in a recent video on Nerd on a Budget's channel said something that I really resonate with, especially in the PC tech space. There is a lot of fear mongering when it comes to CPU parts, where you think that if you don't get the best part, you will not have a good experience, but that is simply not the case. And as Toasty Bros said in their hot take, there are no bad parts when it comes to PCs. Every product has a place on the market, and if it fits your needs and budget, then it's a good combination. And if anyone disagrees with me on that, fight me on it. If you found this video useful, please give it a like and consider subscribing if you want to see more videos that I release. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.